What's up, people of the internet? My name is Dabacab, and today we're going to talk about Lycan, specifically how can you win games with Lycan in your deck. So stay tuned. So Lycan is an impressive green hero, and in fact when I played him at PAX, I found him to be on the stronger end of green heroes, so I'm very interested to play a deck with him. Naturally, I've been theory crafting a bit, so I thought I'd share some insight with you on how to win games with Lycan in your deck. So before we get into his premier spell, let's take a little bit of time to talk about his card himself. He has decent stats, which makes him a fairly impressive brawler in the combat phase, especially when you take into consideration his passive. That +2 attack on either side of him really adds up. At the start of the game, you can reasonably expect that to hit one of your minions, which is fantastic because +2 attack is the magic number that you need to make your melee creep kill their melee creep. So potentially this can help contribute to an early game gold advantage by getting those extra kills. But of course, melee creep aren't the ideal neighbors for Lycan. So the question becomes, what should you be putting next to Lycan instead? So right off the bat, you want any sort of unit that's tough, that stays in its lane, because the longer that a unit stays next to Lycan, the more potential damage it will do. And the best possible candidate for that is other red heroes. Red has some of the toughest, most resilient units in the game, so it makes a lot of sense to pair Lycan with really brawly, tough, tanky red heroes. Great candidates are Centaur Warrunner and Tidehunter. Tidehunter especially, he is the toughest and hardest to kill hero in the game. He's offset of course by his rather mediocre 2 attack, but with Lycan next to him, you will hit that magic number of 4 attack and he can start taking out creep. The same is true for Centaur Warrunner. Centaur is not quite as tough as Tidehunter, but with 4 base attack, we can bring that up to 6 for a rather intimidating body. So plopping down one or more of these heroes next to Lycan will create a really intimidating front line that will help you completely dominate combat. The issue is you don't want to overcommit to this strategy. Obviously, Lycan with Tidehunter on one side of him and Centaur Warrunner on the other is going to be a lot of damage coming through, a lot of damage that is of course incredibly hard to kill. But 3 heroes in a lane is a bit of an overcommitment. I really wouldn't recommend that. Of course, the issue with Centaur and Tidehunter is that while these heroes do have great bodies to pair with Lycan's passive, both of their premier cards are only usable on red heroes, which means of course you can't use them on Lycan. So we have to wonder if there's better options out there. And luckily we don't have to look too far in green. Omni Knight is an excellent partner for Lycan. He has an incredibly tough body and a self heal, which makes him even tankier than before. Additionally, Omni Knight's active ability can be used to heal the Savage Wolves, which of course we'll get into later. So any sort of deck that runs Lycan and Omni Knight would be very good at putting down tough creatures and then keeping them alive to ensure that they keep getting that benefit from Lycan's passive over and over for massive tower damage. Chin is also a fairly decent pairing with high health, plus Chin's active ability will pull an enemy creep onto your lane, so potentially you can put Chin next to Lycan, use the active ability and pull another creep to the other side of Lycan. You can't always be certain that will happen because where the card comes in will be a little bit random, but having more creep on your side of the board is of course more useful for ensuring that you can get as much mileage out of Lycan's ability as possible. Furthermore, Hand of God is an excellent pairing for Lycan, especially with Savage Wolves. Sure, Savage Wolves do heal 2 health every turn, which will basically counteract any sort of damage they take from melee creep, but that damage will slowly add up time after time after time. So by the time a Savage Wolf gets up to 7 or 8 attack, it'll probably have fairly low health. Hand of God can completely heal up your Savage Wolves to full, as well as any other partner sitting next to Lycan and Lycan himself. So Chin really does have a lot of synergy with Lycan, and you may want to consider adding him to your green Lycan deck. And last but not least, we have Rix. Rix has one of the best defensive abilities in the game. He doesn't have the most impressive body, but if he dies, he comes back time and time again. As a result, you don't have to worry at all about increasing the defenses of Rix because dying is not a big deal. Instead, you want to focus entirely on offense. You need to give Rix lots of attack, big weapons, so that when he is on the board, he hits really hard. And of course, if you have Rix in your deck as well, you can simply place him right next to Lycan for that free +2 attack bonus and ensure that Rix will be a constant headache for your opponents. As for creep cards, Lycan Lycan will benefit from any sort of creep who helps buff your line of minions. Cards like Emissary of the Quorum will be especially effective at ensuring that Lycan and his allied neighbors are strong and hard-hitting. For cheaper options, I would consider Mists of Avernus or Vul Martyr, depending on what your deck is trying to do. One other green creep that you might not have considered is Rebel Decoy. This creep card has a unique active ability that allows him to switch places with a friendly unit. This can create nightmare scenarios for your opponent because of course your opponent is trying to predict what will happen. If Rebel Decoy switches places with Lycan, it becomes incredibly difficult for the opponent to predict where that damage is coming in. Not only can Rebel Decoy switch with Lycan himself, moving +2 attack on both sides to 2 separate creep units, but he can also switch places with one of the units next to Lycan. When it comes to items, you want to make sure that you always have 2 units on either side of Lycan. So to that end, you might want to consider items that create creep units on the board. Things like Book of the Dead or Helm the Dominator will ensure that you get that +2 attack bonus as much as possible. You might also want to consider healing options. Cards like Wingfall Hammer will keep the creep on either side of you alive and well. In fact, this weapon is perfectly suited for Lycan because it specifically modifies allied neighbors, and because Lycan is going to want to have allied neighbors as much as possible, it is perfect synergy for your Lycan deck. As for Savage Wolf, which I have to say is one of the best premier cards that we have seen so far, a lot of the general rules that applies to Lycan also applies to Savage Wolf. You want cards that buff your entire lane, such as Emissary of the Quorum, and you want cards that helps keep the wolf alive, things like Hand of God or Omni Knight with his active ability. Keeping your Savage Wolves alive and well will really threaten your opponent. Of course, they do gain 2 health every single turn, but eventually they can get whittled down, especially if the opponent puts a massive unit in front of them, such as a red hero. Those wolves probably won't last more than 2 turns. Any sort of defensive effects like Regeneration or Hand of God can help ensure that the Savage Wolf becomes unkillable, makes it to the late game, and gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually gobbles up the enemy tower in one bite. As for potential weaknesses, Lycan is really going to struggle against any deck that's exceptionally effective at taking out creep or units next to Lycan. Slay is the obvious card to talk about here. If you put a Savage Wolf next to Lycan, the opponent can easily condemn that creature, and then you're stuck with an empty card slot and 2 wasted potential damage. Also, Lycan might struggle a little bit against red decks. Lycan plus strong neighbors are going to create an impressive frontline that's going to present a lot of damage to the opponent, but even with the +2 attack, a lot of red heroes just aren't going to care. Bristleback Axe can very easily dispatch a Savage Wolf and potentially destroy the Lycan as well. Lycan has to be especially cautious of red because of Cleave. Cleave is a devastating effect that hurts Lycan a bit more than most other heroes because Lycan always wants to have allies next to him. So if you have an axe in front of Lycan and he has a massive amount of Cleave, then you have to be worried that not only is he going to be hitting Lycan, but he's going to be smacking down the allies next to Lycan as well. Red cards like Clear the Deck or Grand Melee can be especially effective at countering Lycan. Though in green we also have the signature card of Magnus in Power, I'm afraid that Magnus across from Lycan can do an incredible job of taking down both Lycan and the Savage Wolves or heroes next to him. And finally, you might have to be a little bit cautious against blue decks. Lycan wants to have a lot of units on your side of the board, and of course, going very wide can make you vulnerable to blue spells like Echo Slam or Tower Barrage. So the more friends Lycan has on either side of him, the more prone he'll be to being completely wiped out by a powerful blue spell. But don't let any of these weaknesses turn you off to Lycan. He is an incredibly powerful card with one of the strongest and most flexible premier spells that I've seen so far. I would definitely have to say that I am Lycan this hero. So if you have any other suggestions for how you can win with Lycan, let me know down in the comments below. So I want to make a bunch more of these hero guide videos, but with so many heroes to choose from, I'm not exactly sure where to start. So I'm asking you, the fans, let me know what sort of heroes you want to see guides for. I can go as in-depth as you like. So go down in the comments and just type out the heroes that you want to see. If I see a hero's name show up a lot, then of course I'll try to feature them in the next hero guide video. Thank you so much for watching. Dabacab out.